Today on the second episode of Retro Rippers, we talk about what happened to one of the biggest names in 90s skateboarding, Josh Kasper. Welcome to Rad Rat Video. 3 times a week on this channel, we learn something new about skateboarding. Sometimes it's trick histories, sometimes it's game reviews of skateboarding games, sometimes it's your questions on Ask Rad Rat. So subscribe so you don't miss out on any of that. But today, we're gonna find out what happened to one of our skate idols of the 90s, Josh Kasper. If you aren't familiar with Josh Kasper, then you must have missed out on a lot of the best skating in the 90s. This guy was known for going huge, probably bigger than anyone else at the time, and for a long time afterward too. But before we get into it too much, let's take a look at how he got famous. This is Jeremy Ray skating at Carlsbad High in 1994. He was one of the top pros at the time. He was really pushing with huge gaps and speed in a world where tech skating had pretty much died out. Jeremy pretty much opened the door to doing real tricks at this spot. People had done Ollie's and kickflips down the gap, but it was just too big to do anything else. But you might know what's coming next. First, frontside flip down the gap, and you can see what kind of reaction he got there. He also did a frontside 360 down it. So keep in mind where things were with this spot at the time. A lot of the basics had been done, but it was taking out pros left and right. Then along comes this 20-year-old kid, Josh Kasper, and he kind of comes out of nowhere with this part in the World Industries Trilogy video in 1996, where he just destroys the spot by doing the first ever 360 flip down it. Think of this like the 90s version of Dave Baczynski kickflipping El Toro. It was just such a big event in skateboarding that he instantly became famous. And it's great that it worked out that way because he actually risked his life doing that trick. A little bit before he landed that, he bailed it and smashed his head really hard. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said if he hit that same spot again, it might kill him. So next time he skated it, he actually wore a helmet, and then he did land that 360 flip. But apparently Tony Hawk saw that footage, and he told him he needed to go back and do it without the helmet or no one would take it seriously. So that's what he did. He risked his life to start his skateboarding career, took off the helmet, and went and did it again. But over the next 12 years or so, Kasper would keep going back to that spot and just killing it with more and more difficult tricks, eventually like a tray flip tail grab. So a few years go by, and next thing you know, Kasper is everywhere. He had about 20 different pro model decks over his career with Blind, and even had a pro shoe with the biggest shoe company at the time, Osiris. Meanwhile, he just keeps ollieing bigger and bigger gaps, like possibly the world's first 20 set in 1999. This part in 99 here was actually his last major part. The Osiris tour was just so big and so demanding that it took up a lot of his time. And during these tours, he started to get a little bit of an ego going. Jerry Sue had a lot to say about Kasper from back in those days, and he talks about how he would bail tricks on purpose to try to get some drama going and get to hype up the crowd, trying to get people to chant his name and get him to do the trick. And he would refer to himself in the third person, and that all of this sort of persona was inspired by pro wrestling. And so Kasper was asked about this, and he admits that most of that is true. He was really into WWE or WWF at the time, and it was just all about making a big entrance. He actually tells a story about how he was giving out awards at a skate camp, and he paid $700 of his own money to fly 3 miles in and land on a helicopter so that he could make an entrance. Apparently he learned that move from Tony Hawk, who did the same thing before, but he's Tony Hawk, he probably owned the helicopter. Another thing Kasper would do is he would show up to demos and other kinds of events in a limo, and he built up a fan group for himself, and I'll talk about that in a second. But one thing that Jerry Sue mentioned that Kasper completely denies is that he would bail stuff on purpose to build hype. So to hear Kasper talk about it, he says he just wasn't that good, and he always pushed himself a little bit further than he should have, so he would bail a lot. And he even had some interesting evidence for that, saying he could only do about 5 or 10 tricks. So I thought I would take a look at his video parts from the past, and I wrote down all the tricks that he does more than once, and I happened to come up with 10 exactly. So here they are. First is Ollie'S. Kasper was known mostly for ollieing really huge stuff, like over this DJ. That was kind of a crazy story too. He said that this gap was just so big, no one had ever done it before, and he needed to make a spectacle out of it to just force him to actually do it, get a lot of people there watching. But aside from that, you'll see a lot of straight ollies in general in his video parts. Next is kickflips. Not a lot to say here. He does a ton of straight kickflips. A little bit later in his career, he started doing a few nollie flips as well, but you don't see them very often. Third is heel flips. Kasper was a huge heel flipper, including doing the first one down Carlsbad, and also possibly the first to actually skate the spot like this, doing the gap and the rail at the same time. You'll also see him do a few Fakie heel flips, which is a little unusual. Not a lot of people do those aside from Day One Song. Fourth, pop shove-its. You don't really see people do these plain that much anymore, but Kasper does them a lot. You'll see them in all of his parts. Fifth and sixth are lip slides and tail slides. These are his most common slide or grind tricks that he does by far. Every so often you'll get lucky and see him do something like a nose blunt, but it's not very common at all. Seventh, hard flips. Any kind of vertical frontside kickflippy thing was absolutely one of his favorite things. So he did a lot of hard flips at the beginning of his career. He eventually branched out into switch and nollie a little bit too, but he also did a ton of frontside flips. Again, the way that he does them, this is almost like a variation of a hard flip instead of an actual frontside flip, but I'll still count it separately. Ninth, frontside half cab flip. Again, this is just another take on the vertical hard flip kind of thing, but he also does a few nollie backside flips too, to be fair. Lastly, the 360 flip. This was his go-to trick. If he was ever going to do something big, like an ender or a big trick at the demo or something like that, it would always be a 360 flip. It's a trick that put him on the map, and the trick that he rode all the way until the end of his career, which we'll get to in a second. So that's only 10 tricks. Every now and then you'll see something extra, like a Benihana. He gets a ton of flack for doing that trick, but seriously, his parts are those 10 tricks over and over and over. To me, this very limited trick selection was the worst part about 90s skating. You watch a video through it and you see the same trick over and over and over. Like, how many tray flips are there in Secondhand Smoke? Probably 8 million. But it was kind of funny. There's actually a rumor that he couldn't do grinds at all. And Transworld actually asked him about this, and he said, quote, "I don't know if I have the patience for that. I've just been more into going down stuff than actually doing handrails. I guess grinding a flat, round bar was harder to me than anything else. And then taking that to a handrail when you can't do it on a flat bar, now that's a problem." Now, there was a note from the editor that says they have a picture of him doing a double set gap to crook, but they couldn't publish it because someone else had already done the trick first. But that was in 2004 when his career was basically over already. Josh also admits that he could not skate mini ramps. He says, again, another quote, "Seriously, when I step on there, I think to myself, I can do 2 tricks. And they're not even tricks, like a 50-50 stall and a rock to fakie. I've never taken the time to learn." So it's funny, he calls it a 50-50 stall, which really says something instead of saying axle stall. But even though Kasper embodied some of the worst things about skating in the 90s, he was still really cool. He had a lot of personality in his video parts. He went bigger than anybody else. There was always a lot of excitement when you watched him skate. I mentioned earlier that he had built up a fan club for himself, and his fans were called Kasperholics. And he even had a website for that called Kasperholics.com. And you couldn't miss that because it was in big, bold letters all over all of his ads that he made. He was such a big name at the time that Blind just let him do whatever he wanted to do. And he ended up getting a pretty big head about all this stuff. He was making so much money he didn't even know what to do with it. He was asked about the best month he ever had, and in that month he made $12,000 off of his shoe model, $5,000 off of his deck. So if you combine that, adjust it for inflation, we're talking almost $25,000 in 1 month. And he didn't save any of it. So just imagine, he's buying cars, he's flying in helicopters, he's partying, he's living it up as much as he could, and it kind of comes across like a real doucher at the time. But although that may have been who he was, you should check out this interview with Muckmouth that he did. He seems like these days, he's really got his head on his shoulders right, and he just kind of looks back at that time and laughs about it. Seems like he really grew up a lot since then. But whatever happened with his career? He tells the story about going to Hollywood High. His plan was to 360 flip, of course, the 16, but he found that he couldn't even ollie the 12.
And Josh Kasper couldn't come through because he was drinking too much. He was partying too much. He was hungover too much.
Kasper was featured in a book called Livin' It, Testimonies, which is a book about skaters and BMXers and their faith in God, and we'll get to that in a second. But here's what that book says about his career and how it ended. A few years after he turned pro, Josh started getting involved in partying and drinking because that seemed like it was just part of being famous. He was skating less and less, and it began to lose its appeal for him. It no longer satisfied him. Josh's sponsors began calling up and saying, "You need to get back in there and do more demos and competitions and stuff, or we're going to have to drop you." Eventually, Josh lost all his sponsors because he just felt like he couldn't live up to their standards and expectations for him to keep doing bigger and bigger stuff. For years, he had been trying to keep up with what the companies expected from him, and he was getting tired of it. So he got kicked off of his sponsors, but he says he deserved it and he saw it coming. He also says that Rodney Mullen himself fired him. But Rodney felt so bad about it that he actually gave him 3 months' pay as severance, which is pretty cool. Skaters typically are always independent contractors, so it's not like there's really a legal need to do that, but he did it anyway, which I thought was pretty cool. And it seems like this happened probably around late 2003. He had ads showing that he was actually filming for a blind video up until this time, but it never surfaced. The next blind video was What If in 2005, which is well after he had been dropped. I wonder what happened to that footage. Something else that happened was that Kasper's dad died in 2001. So yeah, that happened, then he lost his sponsors in 2003, and he started to go downhill, started to have issues with depression, and he hit a low point in his life. So right then, he started to go back to church with his mom, and he rededicated himself to God. And this really turned his life around. He started getting involved in Bible study groups and all that kind of stuff. And he got so much into that stuff, actually, that he got involved with something called King of Kings Skateboard Ministry. So this is a group that would go somewhere, they would give a 15 to 20 minute Bible discussion, and then they would do a skate demo afterward. He was also involved with Reliance Skateboards, which is a Christian deck brand that's basically doing the same kind of stuff. You know, using skateboarding as a way to get in front of kids so that they can spread gospel messages to them. And so he was getting involved in that, and he actually did some tours with Reliance, and he actually filmed some new stuff around 2008. And he was actually really good still, maybe even better than ever. But he says that he screwed things up again and he stopped working with Reliance. Then he was with them again a little bit later. I'm not sure what happened exactly. But right now, as of 2017, he's not listed as being on their team anymore. So what is he up to? He still skates a couple times a month at least, and he still got his favorite trick, the tray flip on lock. He got married in 2012, and he says that he bought a skate shop, which I think is Avalanche Skate Shop in El Cajon, California. Unfortunately, according to Facebook and Yelp and anywhere else I was able to find, it seems like it's been out of business for about a year and a half. It also had some mixed reviews up until that point, saying it wasn't that great of a shop, but who knows. So what is he up to right now? I don't know. He's not active on social media at all, and the last interviews seemed to be from before the shop closed, from what I can tell. But he's 41 right now, probably still skating a little bit, and hopefully he's doing all right. If anybody knows what happened after his shop closed, or if you've been there and you've met him, I want to hear about that below in the comments. And if you have a favorite retired skater you want to see me catch up with and see what's going on with them right now, let me know about that in the comments. You might see them on the next edition of Retro Rippers. But until then, make sure you subscribe so that you can keep learning something new about skateboarding 3 times a week. And until next time, here are some more videos you might want to check out. Don't forget to subscribe by hitting my logo on screen. Thank you for watching.